Okay, we are recording. Good morning, everyone from New York, or good afternoon or evening, depending on your time zone. I want to welcome everybody to our session this morning. It is 10 o'clock. Maybe we'll give another 60 seconds or so for folks to be able to continue to stream in. We're very happy to have you here, and you found your way here, which is great. Just for the record, my name is Jim Carney, and I'll get to the introductions in a moment. Just some basic housekeeping. You will have the ability to ask questions and unmute. I would just ask that if you could raise your hand first and I can recognize you, and we can do so. We do plan on having a large chunk towards the last part of the conversation to open the discussion to everyone, either through the chat or through verbalizing by opening microphones. This is very much a conversation, and it's live for a reason, and we're glad everyone is there. So without further ado, because we are time limited, this is an hour session. I want to welcome everybody. Good morning from New York, and whatever other time zone you're from. Once again, my name is Jim Carney. I'm an assistant professor of journalism and media studies at the City University of New York at the Lehman College campus. Lehman is the four-year college campus. CUNY, if you don't know, it's City University of New York. CUNY is a university that's, I liken it to the old Soviet Union, where you had the regime running things from the central office, which is CUNY Central, and then we had the individual nation states around the outer boroughs of New York City and the other counties. And Lehman College is the four-year college that serves the Bronx, and as well as the region. It is a historically Hispanic serving college. I've been there for about 20 years. That's enough about me, but I want to welcome everyone to this session. A little bit of housekeeping as well. I want everyone to know that in the chat, there are a couple of things. First of all, the participants have put their email addresses for you to follow up. I've also put a link to a more detailed bio listing, as well as the abstract from my Dropbox, which you can get access to that rather than take up room in the chat. You can just you take a look at that or download it, and you'll get a little bit more of an idea of who we are. I'll introduce everyone briefly in a moment. Also, a couple of other things of interest that as we go along, you may see some links come up there. So that's enough about the session. At this point, I would like to introduce our speakers and our guests. Let me get my right document up here. What's the old expression? A jack of all screens, but master of none, to modify the saying. First of all, I want to introduce our panel. Joining us from Howard University and from Washington, D.C. is an old friend of mine. Well, actually, he's a longtime friend. I won't call him an old friend. That's an insult. Fritz Gerald, at one time in an earlier age, worked very early on in community-based electronic media, serving the inner city communities of New York City, creating television programming, which was very innovative and creative for its time, using old technology. So we've been working on this together. He's currently at Howard University at the Cathy Hughes School of Communications, and he's a professional who is currently working in the media industry. You can see his affiliation there, Fox News. So I'm sure he'll have some stuff to talk about with this conference, this session. I'd also like to welcome Ellen Fleischer, who I actually only got to know in recent years, but I have vicariously known her for a very long time because she has been all over American media, particularly in New York. She's been involved in print and broadcast media for more than 25 years. After getting her master's at the University of Pennsylvania Annenberg School, She became a reporter at the New York Daily News and made the transition into television news. She's worked at every major O&O owned station in New York and at CNN, and she transitioned to CBS News as a producer, working overseas and everywhere from Moscow to Tokyo to Beijing. And she will be modest. I will not. She's won many Emmy Awards for her work. So welcome, Ellen. Jennifer Thomas is at Howard University as well. Professor Thomas is an associate professor of journalism, sequence coordinator in the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film. And Howard is her alma mater. She has her Master of Arts from Columbia University, and she has been named the Scripps Howard Foundation AEJMC 2019 Teacher of the Year. She's an award-winning broadcast journalist with 20 years of experience, most recently as executive producer at CNN. She actually served as the 9 a.m. show producer during the September 11th attacks, which is a credential which is pretty amazing. So welcome, Professor Thomas. And finally, Cici Wakisi is an associate professor of professional practice at the University of Miami. Dr. Wakisi is an associate professor there. She is a two-time winner of the university's Excellence in Teaching Award. She is a writer with the South Florida Times, which is a weekly newspaper that caters to African-American communities in Miami-Dade. Her master's is from Northwestern University, and she has written for the Detroit News, the Plain Dealer in Cleveland, Kansas City Star, and Miami Herald. A former managing editor of the Miami News Service. Most importantly here, Dr. Wakisi participated in the US State Department grant, which funded training workshops on how journalists can better cover social issues, including HIV/AIDS. And she was a co-presenter at workshops in India, in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and the cities of Multan and Lahore in Pakistan. So she has a good deal of experience in those areas. So enough of the introductions. There's more detail. To get us started, I had simplified and boiled down what the general abstract for our conversation was into one sentence, which I posted in the chat yesterday. So hopefully some folks had a chance to look at that. Briefly, what it boils down to in simple language is that we've come from a time of scarcity to a time of almost infinity in terms of information flow. And in the olden times, there were gatekeepers that, for better or for worse, filtered that information in such a way that very often constructed and served to, it either served or misserved or abused the populace, but there has always been that element of curation that was involved in information as it was distributed to society and determined how a civic society established itself anywhere in the world. With digitalization, the internet, and with all of the onslaught of information, and I'll call it content. I was corrected by Professor Fleischer when we started the conversation. It's not information, it's content, because it doesn't warrant definition of information. It's very hard for people who are training journalists to frame that in such a way and to be able to instruct young journalists or beginning journalists on how to first identify, refine, and present that truth, and then get people to care about it. So in essence, the more simplified question is, how do educators of journalists and media professionals teach students to mine for truth and present it in a way that promotes civic engagement, fosters productive public debate, and counters the malicious? I have one more thing to say, though, to frame things off. I have right here one of my most prized possessions that I got when I was an employee at Time Warner. It's hard to make out here, but what this is a piece of the Berlin Wall that is encapsulated in lucite. Every employee of Time Warner in the world received one of these chips, and the inscription on it says, "This is a remnant of the Berlin Wall, which stood as a barrier against the free exchange of ideas, information, and culture. You helped bring down this wall." I just got a chill again, just reading that. So with that, I am going to start our conversation. We're going to have brief presentations by each of our presenters, and I hand the baton off to Ellen Fleischer from Fordham University. Ellen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to join you today to help further a discussion here about something that concerns and consumes journalism educators just about every minute they spend in the classroom. I've long said that if we can turn out discerning students who are able to synthesize and evaluate the overload of information and content which is hurled in their direction, if they can emerge from this onslaught thoughtful, engaged, rational citizens eager to better their world, well, then we can all congratulate each other and we can all go home. But of course, this is not a simple matter. We are charged with inspiring our students to care profoundly about the world, to correct societal wrongs, to illuminate, to improve things. And that's no small feat, especially considering the radical change in the media landscape, which has occurred in a relatively short period of time. As Jim pointed out, there is an absence of traditional gatekeepers, and the role of gatekeepers began to diminish with the rise of the so-called citizen journalist. That's anybody with a camera on their phone. Everybody can record video, everybody can upload it, and the cell phone became the great equalizer. And right on its heels came the misperception that everybody's interpretation of information is equal, to which I say, no, it isn't. Practitioners out there, think of the stern copy editors you faced in mainstream media to routinely on a daily basis. You couldn't get anything by them, and they would hold your feet to the proverbial fire. In social media, serious gatekeepers with a set of standards, true standards, are singularly absent, and the ramifications of this are staggering. A year ago, Pew Research reported that 78% of American millennials get their news from social media. And this phenomenon is hardly unique to the United States. Statista, the German marketing research company, reported a study which found that more than 50% of their responding internet users in 24 different nations rely upon social networks to keep up to date with news. And up to date is putting it mildly. Several years ago, while working for BuzzFeed, reporter Davey Alba, who is now part of the New York Times, Davey wrote a devastating investigative piece about the social media's influence, overwhelming influence in politics in the Philippines. I remember thinking at the time, oh, that couldn't possibly happen here. And now look back at those thoughts as woefully naive. At the center of the Philippine story was Facebook and the critical role it played in supporting one regime and eliminating killing competition. Much has been said and written about the role of social media in perpetrating biased content, bald-faced lies, and also insidious hate speech, and the significance, acceptance, or seeming acceptance of it. While it is very convenient to blame social media for all of societal ills, the truth is social media did not create hate. What social media is in a unique position to do is amplify it. And I regret to say, weaponize it, and it is being done rather successfully. The success has been aided by, first, the recent revelations of Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen, who we've all read about. And in response to these disclosures, I learned this morning that Facebook is now undergoing an internal reputational review, whatever that means. And what it should mean to educators and parents is a continuing deep concern. And secondly, into this mix comes what I like to call genuine fake news, which has become an industry of its own, with people paid to write and promulgate sensationalist and hate material with one overarching goal in mind: to create clickbait content, to increase site traffic, hold the audience, maximize profits. And we all know that Disinformation, fiction masquerading as fact, and deliberate lies are made to look legitimate and can easily reach thousands of users in a matter of minutes. All too often, frequent repetition of the falsehood is used to verify the accuracy of the content. Legitimacy has somehow become linked to the number of times people have shared or liked a story on social media. Repetition, therefore, determines reliability. Think about that one and shudder. And to quote the understatement of Jeff Horowitz in the Wall Street Journal, he said, the product is not under control. So where does that leave media educators charged with the awesome responsibility of bringing the next generation of reporters and content generators up to par? I venture to say the job has never been more challenging, especially because younger consumers are often at a greater risk of exposure to fake news than older generations because by sheer virtue of their reliance and use of social media. Some journalism and communication educators make a fatal flaw when they assume a degree of media literacy in their students, which might or might not be there. It may startle some of you to learn that far too many young college students do not know the difference between news and opinion programming. For observers of Fox News, for example, they equate Chris Wallace, Brian Yennis with Tucker Carlson. They see them as news reporters, all news reporters, presumably because they all appear on the same network talking about news. But of course, nothing could be further from the truth. Wallace and Yennis, we all know, straight hard news reporters, whereas Tucker Carlson is a commentator, appearing nightly on his own highly rated and highly biased opinion show. These men are 180 degrees apart. I know this, you know this, but students who have grown up with the blare of the box and the glare of the screen 24/7 might not. The first goal, therefore, must be the creation of news workers and consumers with critical judgment, starting with the ability to distinguish between opinion-based and fact-based programming, distinguishing between reporters and commentators, distinguishing between news analysts whose judgment are fact-based and those who are opinion-based, knowing that not all websites are created equal, knowing that there's a difference between Politico and people.com. Critical thinking means learning to distinguish between quality and the tsunami of other content pouring in over the transom. And first and foremost, students need to be persuaded that the principles of truth, accuracy, and fairness are not necessarily to be found in their social media newsfeed. That and the truth, fairness, and accuracy are more important than the baubles. And one of the ways to get to the heart of this is to nurture skepticism in students, not cynicism, skepticism. Upon reading or hearing any pronouncement of seeming substance, I believe in teaching students to immediately and initially react by saying, says who? By the way, saying says who is not an innate attribute. It has to be developed. It has to be bolstered by repetition, constant repetition. And may I add, this holds for everyone, including you, and everything you say from the lofty podium in front of the class. If we are to develop skeptics in the classroom, you are on the firing line as much as any social media post. There's no waving of a magic wand here. Unfortunately, there is no quick fix for fake news. Awareness is step one. And on heels of that, improving one's ability to identify and correct false information is a must. You know the expression, everything old is new again? Fact checking must be an integral component of journalism education. Original sourcing, learn how to read documents. Identifying and cultivating reliable sources is another. Encouraging skepticism is a third. If it sounds suspicious, it probably is. The important work of journalism educators is in the development of young people who are dedicated to achieving a safer news environment for the news consuming public. This is a huge job, and everyone deserves luck and fortitude. Thank you for your attention. I'd now like to turn this over to the secret weapon of the University of Miami, the one and only Cece Wakisi.
Hang on, CC, you should be able to go ahead. Nope, one more time. There you go.
I apologize. I have some noise here, so I muted to make sure that you all weren't hearing the noise in my house. So thank you very much, Ellen. I have so much admiration for you and for all of our distinguished panelists today. And I want to echo some of the things that she said. There have been many studies that talk about how students get their news. And it certainly is true based on these polls and from my own experience in talking to my students that social media seems to be the predominant way that students get their, or is their pathway to news. I have some figures in front of me based on a Knight Foundation study. And what surprised me, but maybe not so much surprised me, was that newspapers, the print newspapers particularly, only 5% of college students, not just millennials, specifically college students, look at a newspaper on a daily basis. And with TV, 15%. So the number is slightly higher, but guess what? When students say that they're getting their news from TV, they're not necessarily talking about cable or the local local news, but John Oliver and The Daily Show, Trevor Noah, they're talking about James Corden, Colbert, Jimmy Fallon, Samantha Bee, and Saturday Night Live. So you can get, I'm not saying you can't get any news from that, but really? So it's alarming. It's very alarming. And then when I give my students news quizzes, they don't do so well initially. By the end of the semester, we're getting there. I want to say one thing though, when we talk about this now, I don't want to take too much of a romantic, nostalgic look at the way we used to cover things. There were a lot of things wrong with that. And I think Jim alluded to that. He says, the perfect and not so perfect way that gatekeeping took place. And when I first got into journalism, I was still seeing that transition there before in terms of diversifying the newsrooms and diversifying the coverage. It's just really pretty bad. And it's because of that we had these other voices come out, the Black press, the gay press, the conservative press. Black Lives Matter came about because it was felt that the mainstream media were not giving enough attention to all of these killings of Black men by police. And so therefore, we need a voice. Our voice isn't being represented in mainstream media. But now, having said that, and I think that the media have made monumental improvements, in fact, not enough monumental in the sense that we've come from 0 to maybe 50, still not there yet, but we have made great improvements. I wanted to talk about specifically now, because we kind of know what the problems are. They've been very well explained already, but I'm just going to share with you some of the things that I do in my classrooms. I teach primarily journalism students, and we are a somewhat global university in that our students come from all over the world. And we have a very heavy Hispanic population, an Asian population, Caribbean population as well. And so we get to see students from all over. I think one of the things that I try to do is to bring in guest speakers, assign stories and readings about issues and causes and efforts that reflect diversity. One of my interviewing assignments, for example, is I will ask my students to go out and interview 10 people. And some of those categories have to be interview somebody whose language is not your language, your first language. Someone who has a physical disability. How often is that voice left out of general stories because we're uncomfortable approaching someone in a wheelchair, perhaps? Interviews a senior citizen, a white collar worker, a blue collar worker, and what I like to call a no collar worker. There are lots of people who are unemployed in our country and all over the world, and those voices certainly need to be heard. In my teaching, I also use examples from not just mainstream press, but from all over the world. Al Jazeera, let's read a story on, Al Jazeera website, or go to the BBC. If I look at a story talking about leads or sourcing from the Washington Post, I also will look at the Washington Times. I think that we need to do a better job of diversifying, and really truly meaning diversifying our coverage, but as well as explaining stories to students. Let them see different examples from different places, and I think that helps quite a bit. I also teach what I call real world realities. I had a graduate student who applied for a job at CNN. She was a wonderful student, very, very smart, could turn the story around very quickly. She went into the interview and they gave her a news quiz. She wasn't expecting that. Well, she should have been, because I told that these things happen. But not just the news quiz, everybody. It was a news quiz in which they had a map, and they said, okay, find the country, find the city, find the state that we're discussing here in this question. And she was able to do it. But just the other day, when we were talking about Afghanistan, I gave my students an unlabeled map. Not one, I'm afraid to tell you, not one could correctly identify Afghanistan on a world map. Not one. 32 students, not one. So this tells me what we need to, part of what we have to do as educators to bring our students into our local communities, into our national communities, into our global communities. Because our students get their news from social media and from each other, many times their stories are written with what? Their viewpoint in it, which means that they think it's fine for us to find, to know what they think about it, an issue. And it shouldn't be. Their opinion should be taken out. And finally, I like to, just talk a little bit about, we're talking about malicious content, and I would also like to say fictitious content. So I just want to read to you quickly a post that I saw, not too recently, but I keep seeing it. And it goes this way. The NAACP is the United States' oldest civil rights organization. And this was the message. The NAACP has received credible information that some of the white nationalist groups and white supremacist groups have initiations happening this weekend. As part of the initiation, it is said that they will be looking to snatch Black men and boys and hang them, shoot them, torture them, and kill them. So please spread the word. Do not let your sons go out alone. Pay attention to your surroundings. If you made friends with someone recently, do not be gullible and naive. They may have another motive. Be cautious. Stay prayed up. Only travel in pairs, and even then pay attention. If your car is hit by a truck or van, don't be jumped to quick out. Pay attention. Women, also be alert. The rumor is that they will seek men, but we know that at some point anyone will do. Be careful. Now, as I said, I saw this more than once, more than, and from friends I was surprised to get it from. But part of this is because there's this message, this fake news that Ellen referred to that's out there. And then when you prey on a community, especially a minority community, it makes a bad thing even worse. Should we be preyed up? I would say yes. Should we travel in pairs? There are some truths in this statement, but to say that that particular weekend, Black men were being targeted, and the next weekend I get the same message, and then the following weekend, we know that this is not, it's coming from a place that is not news. I teach my students to check using the check news to make sure that they consider the source and that they check the reporter or the author. They check the dates of the stories, as for example, the one that I just talked about has been circulating for quite a while. Sometimes people are putting things out there as a joke. And then there are many fact-checking organizations like Snopes, PolitiFact, factcheck.org, and even Google Earth. I've received pictures of a scene where there's a disaster, and it's not where they say it was. It's something completely different because people use it to tell their narratives, their own narratives. So anyway, those are my few ideas about and practices that I use in my class. And I'm certainly happy now to introduce you to Professor Jennifer Howard, who is going to share more ideas with you.
Jennifer Thomas, right? Jennifer, you want to
say? I'm sorry. She's at Howard.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor. And thank you for this conversation, Professor Carney. And I want to say hello to everyone who's joining us. Looks like around the world. So thank you for allowing us to have this really important conversation. So I want, our colleagues have already shared a lot of great information. So as we begin this hearty discussion or continue this hearty discussion about the future of the media and about media practitioners and teaching students going into journalism and media, we have to shine a spotlight on ourselves before we can look ahead. Or as we often tell people, we have to strap on our life vest first before saving the person next to you. And so I want to share a portion of a speech. I was invited in 2019 to be the speaker for the country of Nigeria on World Press Freedom Day. And I'll put in the chat the link. One of the papers there published the entire speech. And I think it's a good way of just highlighting what we're here to talk about, especially as we examine how misinformation and disinformation affects us as journalists and as journalism professors. So I'll just read the first couple of paragraphs. Disinformation, or what many around the world dub as fake news, and the subsequent demolishing of the media have created a political and pedagogical poser for not just members of the media, but for professors who are tasked with teaching would-be millennial journalists. The current climate for the news industry is what I say is synonymous to a thunderstorm, with the convection being the calamity of the fourth estate as fake news. Add in the unpredictability of social media, and it becomes the perfect storm. So in order to quell this tempest, journalists must ride out the storm, steady the ship through adhering to the fundamental principles of our profession. And in turn, journalism professors must be vigilant at teaching media history, literacy, and ethics while underscoring excitement for this profession. It is a daunting yet surmountable task. So I have been a passionate defender in the journalist's role in sustaining democracy in the US and for journalism around the world. There's a phrase that I've coined in class for the past few years, and I encourage my students at the beginning of the semester to come up with a phrase or quote that they penned that discusses why they wanted to come into this profession. Just this week, we had, what was the day? News, I can't remember now the official name of the day, but my students went and talked on camera very briefly about why they chose news. And we posted it on our Twitter page. And I always try to have them, reflect on what their calling was, why they've decided to come into this profession. So my quote is that journalists are the defenders of democracy, freedom fighters of the First Amendment, and savvy and sophisticated storytellers. And we also know that the media is the most influential enterprise in a democratic society, instrumental in the transmission of cultural values. Media affects all phases of how we see life. And now with Convergent, it has allowed various forms of media to merge, collide, some might say explode in a seemingly uncontrollable way. It impacts how we learn, how we decipher and digest information, social media. It affects how we live our lives, how we educate our children, how we worship. And we know that consumers rely on this vital information from us practitioners. And we know that reliance on journalists and media increases during times of crisis like what we're in now, living through this pandemic. And we also know that misinformation and disinformation can damage that. And it has a domino effect. It undermines the public's understanding of how we know if something is good for us or bad for us. So the question becomes what has been asked at the beginning: what can we as journalists and journalism professors do as we prepare our students to transition from classroom into newsrooms? I say that there are three things we need to do, and we need to encourage our students to do, which is what journalists need to do. That's to be truthful, to be able to properly use technology, and to be transparent. So being truthful, very quickly, we want to teach our students, which our colleagues have said already, to be truth tellers. And to be truth tellers, we have to have due diligence in what we do. That means we've already talked about researching in your reporting, using what we used to say back in local news, even and in national news, finding those three sources before you post. Don't just copy and paste something that you see in social media, put it in your story and say that's your source for the story. Original reporting. Learn how to look up information, whether it's trying to figure out how to get utilize the Freedom of Information Act, how to find out information behind a study that's coming out. We have to teach our students the basics. One thing I always like to say is we have to go back to the basics. So just be truth tellers and make sure that our fundamental thing is to report the truth. Know the difference, and we've already shared how we can decipher fake news, but we have to know the difference between opinion-based storytelling and factual storytelling in order for our students to know how to do that as they begin their careers. And then for technology, we know that we are working with Gen Z, digital natives. So many of them know how to use a cell phone before they can speak sometimes. So we have to make sure that they know, yes, they can get on TikTok, they can get on Twitter and know how to use Instagram, but how do they know to use social media and technology in the pursuit of truth and the pursuit of journalism? So we have to make sure that they know the proper ways to use technology. That will help them decipher also between misinformation and disinformation. And then finally, transparency. We know that, as someone said earlier, anyone can claim to be a journalist. They just hide behind those computer screens. They put up a website. They start proliferating this information like this NAACP thing, which I received several times as well. We have to be transparent with the information that we share. How do we derive at the information that was presented? When we're presenting a story, whether it's a long form news video piece or an investigative story online, how do we go about deriving on that, with that? We have to share that. And I think that being transparent, if our students I always, when we talk about how do we know the difference between a journalist and everyone else, I stress that we as journalists abide by the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. And we need to make sure that our students are transparent in that. And there are 4 different parts of that code of ethics. It's to seek truth and report it, to be accountable and transparent, to minimize harm, and to act independently. So I think if we stress those 3 things as professors to our students, and I always say I practice what I teach, then we can help them as they begin what I think is the best career in the world. So thank you. And now I'd like to toss it to my great colleague and friend, Professor Fitzgerald. So I'm so happy. We talk all the time as fellow professors at Howard, and thank you for being here with us, Professor Gerald.
Thanks everybody. I'm glad you guys, everybody is here. Very honored to be a part of this discussion because it's something that is very important and I think about, but just like this deluge of information that comes at me, it goes through the airwaves. And so this made me sit down and really even just write up a paper for myself to get my thoughts together. So it helps for me to do that. Jim, I have a couple of clips that I would like to show if possible, just a little thing to, break it up and you don't have to look at my face for the entire time.
You should be able to, Fritz. You're a co-host, so you should be able to do a share screen.
Okay, let me try. Just something that I found interesting, if I'm able to do it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, good.
Just make sure you enable the audio. That's the only thing.
Okay, you tell me real quick if you can hear this.
Incident.
Oops.
Good evening. The world has never known a day quite.
Stop. That ruined my surprise.
We can hear that. Yes, we can hear it.
Okay.
Good evening from our CBS newsroom in New York on this, the first broadcast of network television's first daily half-hour news program.
And that's the way it is. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be counting down the top 10 most memorable TV news moments in the career of Walter Cronkite.
Old anchormen, you see, don't fade away. They just keep coming back for more.
Walter Cronkite was born November 4th, 1916 in St. Joseph, Missouri. He gained prominence as a reporter during World War II.
I'm just back from the biggest assignment that any American reporter could have so far in this war.
And became the CBS Evening News anchor on April 16th, 1962. By 1970, this gentle authority figure was the top-rated news anchor and was the most trusted man in America due to his reliable reports on major 20th century events. Number 10, the Iran hostage crisis. When a group of Americans was taken hostage in Iran by Islamist militants, the country took notice. Months passed without resolution.
Today's confusing events were compounded by conflicting reports from Tehran.
And this prompted Cronkite to add a countdown after his famous closing catchphrase to emphasize how long the crisis had been ongoing. He kept this going until they were finally released over a year later.
And that's the way it is. Tuesday, January 20th, 1981. A day that began as the 444th day of captivity and ended as the first day of freedom for the American hostages in Iran.
Number 9, the 3.
Okay, so that's that one. And I just wanted to go here.
Passed comprehensive internet regulations.
I have to play them.
What happened after that? The internet has come a long way. Shouldn't internet regulations too?
Tired of cold calling?
It's ironic that it was a Facebook ad.
I go into the
Simply sign up for free and congrats.
You can skip ads there.
More than 50 million direct dials.
Americans held hostage behind enemy lines. Day 52.
All right, welcome to Hannity. Sadly, day 52, Biden's State Department is, quote, not in a position to say as of yet how many Americans remain trapped behind enemy lines, hostage to the Taliban. They have no clue. They have no earthly idea. Joe Biden abandoned them. And by the way, the media mob, they just ignored the story as if it didn't happen. Imagine if this happened and Donald Trump was president. There are zero over the horizon capabilities to get them out. All this leverage Joe Biden claimed that he has none. It's been nearly 35 days since Joe Biden even mentioned these Americans he's abandoned. According to a breaking report from the New York Times, scores of CIA assets in Afghanistan and around the globe, they have been captured, they have been killed, or they have been compromised. Make no mistake, all caused by Joe Biden and all completely preventable.
Okay, and just one more thing here. So little contrast there. And so I was looking, and my colleagues also referred to certain surveys and stuff. So this I found, and it surprised me, a large majority of teens, 78% say it's important to them to follow current events. I think that's a good thing. Teens get their news more frequently from social media sites like Facebook and Twitter or YouTube than from news organizations. I guess we knew that. This is saying more than half, 54% get it from social media, 50% get it from YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. YouTube recommendations drives news consumption. And it says exactly half of them saying that YouTube drives where they go to look for news. 60% who get their news from YouTube say they're more likely to get it from celebrities, influencers, and personalities, et cetera, et cetera. And I did do some brief, because I always like to look at sources. So Common Sense, I looked them up, and SurveyMonkey, and you know, I could always drill deeper. They seem legit, you know, but there are sources that at least help fortify what I wanted to talk about. So thank you, Jim. So it was an interesting contrast between Walter Cronkite, who I grew up on, and yes, absolutely, there were a lot of issues, and still are a lot of issues with how traditional news covers events, who covers them, what events are chosen, et cetera, et cetera. But I would argue that you know, the style of reporting and growing up with that evening news, it was limited as to how much news they could give you. And, you know, you did kind of take it as factual. You just expect, it was a brand, and you expected a certain amount of vetting and honesty and things like that. And I would say the same for New York Times and Washington Post and other major newspapers. When I started talking to Professor Carney about this, the things that jumped out at me and what I kind of based my notes on: media literacy in a post-truth culture. And I didn't know what post-truth, I didn't know that term was a thing, post-truth. I was like, what is that? So I had to look it up. So Oxford Dictionaries has declared post-truth as its 2016 International Word of the Year, reflecting what it called a highly charged political 12 months. It is defined as an adjective relating to circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than emotional appeals. So I was like, whoa, okay, where have I been? I've been on the bus. I need to get off at one of the stops and see what people are talking about, right? So, and I've also done jury duty over the past, whenever it comes up. And it was a few years back, and I was amazed because they would ask us questions. They'd have 100 and more of us in a room. They'd ask where we got our news from. And I was amazed that I might have been the only one in the room who actually freaking watched like network news. And I'm talking people my age, not just like 18-year-olds. It's like, I was just astounded. And I'm like, where are these people getting their news from? And I don't know if they counted things like Fox News or Newsmax or any of these other, I don't know if they counted them as traditional news or not, because they often try to position themselves as anti-traditional. So I'm not quite sure, but I was amazed. So I've been what I'm trying to do, I teach media production at Howard. I've taught a couple of different classes, TV directing, but I'm not teaching journalism per se, even though I have taken journalism classes and I have been a journalist. I've been a reporter. I've been an anchor. And right now, as I've put up on my little indicator, I freelance at Fox News right now. I'm in the studio as a technician and have been with them for about 14 years as a freelancer. And that's a very interesting journey. And what I'll say to you is that there are many people that work there who don't subscribe to the politics of the company, and even some of the on-air people. So that brings up another question of like integrity, or if you're trying to make it as a news reporter or anchor, and you have to fit into this narrative that's crafted on a daily basis, coming down from the EP, the executive producer, or whatever, and that's the theme of the day. How do you navigate that? So just to share an experience or two, and then I'll quit. When I first started in the industry, I was a cameraman for Channel 4 here in Washington, and I remember a story about Mayor Marion Barry. Apparently, there was a rumor that he had gotten shot and was like shot in his front yard or something like that. And I remember there being this whole thing of whether or not to go with the story, right? They were holding it and wanted to do breaking news, and they couldn't get the confirmation. They were trying to get in touch with a couple of people that they felt would firm up the story. And it was a whole thing about wanting to scoop other stations and the whole deal. And at the end of the day, we went with the story, and the story was wrong, and we never got that confirmation. So that's something I remember, and that was from an NBC owned and operated station here in Washington, D.C. Okay. Fast forward to a couple of months ago, I'm operating teleprompter for Fox, and I start seeing in the script and hearing critical race theory. And I'm hearing this over and I'm like, what is that? I didn't get taught that in school, and I know my kids didn't get, like, I don't know what that is. And it's written into every script and every story that day and for the next few weeks. Then you start seeing local stations covering that, and people getting angry and being in board meetings, and parents, and even right now here in Virginia, they're campaigning for the governorship, and one of the key topics is what the parents' role is in like dictating what the curriculum is for students in K through 12. So it's a really amazing thing. So I'm rambling a little bit. I'll bring it all down to this. On Tuesday, my class, we're meeting, there's a buzz, and I said, what's happening? What are you guys excited about? There's a protest happening on campus. And they start telling me about it all at once. And I said, you've got a half hour. Go out there, shoot some footage, and come back. And I let them go. And this is not a journalism class, but it's like, you've got media you can produce. So they all came back, and they started once again telling me, and I said, nope, you're going to give me a report next week. I want you to edit that. And I don't care how you tell. The only gatekeeping I did, I said, I want you to do the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and tell me the story, but I want you to tell me all through the media you give me. You're not going to set it up. You're not going to like explain it. I want you to tell me, and I don't care how. It could be Instagram style, Facebook style. I don't care how you do it, but I want you to communicate to me through your media. I want to see where their heads are right now. They can teach me as much as I can teach them, I think, at this point. So I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Fritz. Um, this is amazing. I mean, we don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to shut up. And what I would ask is our participants to either raise your hand, or if you have a question or a comment. There have been some comments in the general comment section. I want to thank Kausua for her comments. And one of her general questions from earlier on was, do we think that there is as much or more misinformation or disinformation in the media landscape now? I'll say I definitely think so, yes. That there definitely is more. And I don't see any hands at this point. So I'm going to ask one follow-up question. We talked about what in some ways might be the more traditional and the easiest way to easiest part of this question, and that's teaching how to do the who, what, when, where, why. But what about the issue of trust? Because with the mixture of commentary and opinion in with facts that have been researched and fact checked, how do you gain the trust of a viewership, a readership, a listenership, not only here in the United States, but across the world, where the credibility of news organizations, whether it be the New York Times, as was evident back in the 1990s and 80s, with the early 2000s rather, with the first with the Iraq War, with the New York Times, that damaged their credibility, all the way through the credibility we see now with Facebook. How do we reestablish it so that people actually care and trust news organizations? And Jennifer, you look like you want to handle that. Go ahead.
Sure, I can at least start. I'm sure everyone has something to say. Well, you know, it's funny you said that. When I go around and speak to mainly for professionals that are not in media, I generally start with, if I'm doing a PowerPoint and I have a question, and I say, complete this response question for me, and I give them 3 choices. And I say, I regard the media as, and the choices are people who have a job in the industry, fair and balanced journalists, fake news, and another one, the other one is something like, they're okay, but I don't really rely on them, or something, I can't remember. And in every single case, I have received the majority of responses for everyone. Oh, fair and balanced journalists, that's the last option. Every single case, I've gotten responses for all except fair and balanced journalists. And and I've done that probably 12 times in the past 3 years or more. And it says where we are as a society with not having trust in the media. And for all the reasons that you've heard today, there's a proliferation of attacks against the media as being the enemy of the people. We are not the enemy of the people. We are the advocates for the people. So how do we do that? And how do we relay that to our audiences and to our students who are getting into the profession? I just say it goes back to being the truth and transparency. And what you're seeing now are mainstream and local organizations, media organizations, reiterating to their viewers and their audiences and readers that same thing. Democracy dies in darkness. The CNN has had a series of commercials that I often share as well, where this is an apple. And it's like, you know, someone may say banana, 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 but it's still an apple. And then it comes to the tagline, facts matter, or facts first, CNN. So we're seeing that a lot of these major organizations reminding and reiterating that that's the core basis. But in order to do that, I think it's a challenge for our journalist colleagues to stick to reporting more so than opinion-based reporting. So, and then making sure that our students and that our audiences know the difference.
Okay, Professor Wakisi, do you want to join in there? And we do have a hand up. We'll come to Michael right after that.
No, go ahead with Michael. I think she summed it up very well for me.
Okay, Michael, you have a question or a comment?
Hey, thanks everybody for your comments. I think So my question is based in my interest in social movements and community organizing, and their often kind of need to produce their own forms of media to challenge conventional narratives. And so I guess I'm wondering, since you all have a pretty deep sense of experience of the shifting media climate, I'm wondering, how has the role of maybe community-based media, so forms of alternative media made by, say, unions or community organizations, or just sort of local news platforms for investigative journalism of kind of local issues, how has that changed? And I wonder if that kind of shapes kind of the assessments we make of the sort of post-truth environment. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to clarify. Is it okay if we go over from, she's from CG Scholars here. I want to make sure that it's okay if we go a few minutes over. Okay, I'm going to assume it is. So who in our panel would like to handle that? Ellen, would you want to respond to that?
Well, the observation is an important one, Michael. I want to thank you for it, because in hyper-local news is definitely a powerful place from which people who are engaged in the business of covering their local community, this is opposed to network, and of course all news is local, we all know that. It's extremely important, but that doesn't mean that the same critical standards shouldn't be applied to those local forces as we give to national political parties or national labor movements. I would say it's extremely important that reporters, especially on a local level, recognize the existence of and the importance of local movements, local websites, local generation of information, because oftentimes those sources are going to teach them something they did not know before. And so in that way, I welcome it, I appreciate it, bring it in. But, but the same standards have to apply, the standards that all of us have been talking about.
I'll just
Jennifer, go ahead.
I was just going to piggyback on that with community-based news. It's very important too, we always have this term that all news is local. And it's important, I think these organizations are more important now than ever, because they're telling the stories that may not make it into the national news, because nationally they're chasing after the big story or debunking the you know, the falsehood that's out there, or they're focusing on one thing. And then we have all of this plethora of issues over here that are not being covered that are affecting the local communities. I think this is very important also for communities of color, for other issues that are not being covered prominently in mainstream media. And I think we're going to see more community-based and specific micro-based news organizations. And I think it's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
Last word, Professor Casey, before we jump off. No, you unmuted yourself. Go ahead back. There you go.
I would just like to say that, yes, the media, the whole idea that we're worse than we used to be. But when I was in graduate school, and that's, I'm telling you now, I'm showing my age, in the 70s, the late 70s, I was told that the journalism profession ranked right under used car salesmen. I remember that to this day, because we've long have had this struggle. I think it's gotten worse, yes, but it's not new that people don't trust us. It's been there for a while. And that means that we have some work to do. We've always had that work to do. And so I'd like to say that.
Okay, Ellen and then Fritz, last words before we jump off.
I think the answer to, and it sounds like a platitude, but it's unfortunately a truism. The answer to gaining credibility is consistency and track record. And I think that if you have track record and consistency of performance, you will gain greater and greater acceptance. And this doesn't happen overnight. This is a long, long road.
Fritz, last words.
I just wanted to mention something that's interesting to me. Byron Allen is this Black businessman that's out there, and he's been doing some things, and there's a product or a show, a channel that he calls Local Now, and it's kind of on new TVs, Rokus, and everything like that. And it's just one of those things like, keep your eye on. There are these different factors that are coming into play that are trying to, that may play a role in us being able to do more on without having mega bucks. There might be other ways to reach people and support causes, let's say. All right, so that's
okay. Thank you, Fritz. And with that, I first, just the final word I want to say is in the beginning of the session, I told you about this, which is the piece of the Berlin Wall, where we were told that you brought down this wall. What I want to say to the folks watching this, both live and in the recording, you people at this conference now can bring down the new wall, and that's a wall of noise and misinformation. And you can do that through your scholarly work, through your publishing, and most importantly, through your teaching. Whether you're teaching human resources, you're teaching journalism, you're teaching communication theory, it's up to us to break down that new wall, and that new wall being that wall of noise that exists throughout this world with the telecommunications onslaught that we have. Hopefully, we have brought up some interesting topics of discussion. I'd like to thank Professor Cici Wakisi from University of Miami, Ellen Fleischer from Fordham University, and from multitude of broadcast sources, Jennifer Thomas from Howard University, Fitzgerald, also from Howard and from Fox News. We don't hold a grudge. Don't worry, Fritz. And I want to particularly thank the folks at the Conference for Communication and Media Studies and from GC Scholar for allowing us this platform to present CG Scholar. I'm sorry, CG Scholar, to present this platform. Once again, I will leave the window open so you can access the email addresses and the link to the bios. And I encourage folks to reach out to me if you lose any of the information. It's just J Carney, simply J Carney at lehman.cuny.edu or james.carney@lehman.cuny.edu, and I'd be happy to forward you any information. So please enjoy the rest of the conference. On behalf of the panel and myself, I want to thank you for joining us. And until next time, have a great day. Take care.